Don't make the mistake that you are the character. You are the player. You are holding the controls of the character. No one is free from negative emotion. It just does not happen. It is the human condition to unfortunately suffer involuntarily to neurotic tendencies like stress, anxiety, depression, and so on and so forth. So in reaction to this existential crisis that we live in, I thought I would share with you a couple of exercises I use on a daily basis to better exercise and regulate my mental health and my mental equilibrium. Number one is journaling. Journaling is mental hygiene. Like you wash the outside of your body every single day, I think it's also important that you exercise that organ between your ears. So what is the esoteric value that you are getting out of something like journaling? Because on the surface, it does feel so cliche. I'm sure you have heard this many times before, but what is the real utility of journaling? So there are two things I have identified in being most poignant in the application of journaling into a daily routine. The first one is slowing down the thought process. Thoughts in their nature are very fast paced. The phrase racing thoughts or a racing mind does bubble up to the surface of my conscious mind as I'm talking to you now. So you give yourself the opportunity to actually narrow the field of your focus and your attention on one particular thought form. And in this way, you can follow that thought form all the way to its source and relieve that tension. Much like a balloon that has too much air in it, journaling relieves that pressure, a much needed pressure from your mind. And when we do things in this way, when we follow that thought to its source, we manage to make them more palatable and less likely to overwhelm in the long term. This is something that I do especially if I have trouble sleeping. I always keep a journal or even a notebook next to my bedside table. And if I'm having trouble due to, which typically is, those racing thoughts, I make sure I get them down on paper. It alleviates that pressure, and then I'm back to sleep in less than 5 minutes. The second point to highlight here is a dialogue with oneself. Now, you wake up every single morning, you ask your father how he's doing, your mother how she's doing, maybe your brothers, maybe your sisters, maybe your wife, maybe your significant other, but rarely do we give ourselves the opportunity in the space to ask ourselves how we're doing. When is the time that you check in with yourself? It is so naive to think that you can have a healthy conversation internally with your thought form. Most of all because most of our thoughts are untrue. They are impulsive, irrational, illogical, and indiscernible at many times throughout the day. And you can't trust all of them. Journaling offers a healthy medium and a platform for you to interact with those thoughts more healthily. You can extract and give attention to these thoughts with, far more intention, honesty, and utility. What value is it actually bringing to your life? And if it's not bringing value, then discarding it. This value is a far greater understanding of your thoughts, your emotions, and repeating patterns in those thoughts and emotions. It's like having the user manual of the car you drive. You're going to be able to use it more effectively. You're going to know where its strengths are, where its weaknesses are, when to change the oil, when to shift up and down gears. Moving on to the second exercise that I use to better help me deal with my mental health and any negative emotions that may come to overwhelm me is being the witness of my emotions. So many people unwillingly make the mistake that they are their thoughts, they are their emotions, which couldn't be further from the truth. You have thoughts and emotions, but you are not these things. It is only the identification with that thought, with that emotion, that causes that inner turmoil and angst. You will have seen people in your life become rage, become anger, become desire, become shame and guilt, and that dictates and drives the direction and the course of their whole lives. I remember being at school and I had this one friend who I'm gonna name unnamed who had this terrible problem with anger. You couldn't even have a joke with him about even trivial things that were of course untrue and so outlandish, of course they had no bearing on your actual thoughts and beliefs. But as soon as you try to joke around and have a little banter with him, he would become anger, and he would get physically violent and aggressive and call you every pejorative in the book because he took a back seat, because emotions were running him instead of him being present and the witness of his anger and being better able to manage that anger. And it's so embarrassing, it's so tragic watching a man who can't control his emotions. And this isn't something that I'm free from. This is something I still struggle with. Anger isn't typically one that grips me too much, but certainly things like pride. And my relationship with myself has changed drastically when I understood that it's only the identification with that emotion that is bringing me so much unrest. Now, here's the thing. I'm not going to lie to you. This is not an easy thing to exercise. The way I exercise is with some form of mindfulness, in which you can perceive your thoughts and emotion from a neutral and objective stance without becoming them. So just sitting, just walking, just doing one task without any distraction. Meditation, of course, is a classic example of this. Journey inwards and become the watcher of the character that you live in. It's like playing a video game. If you're playing like a role-playing video game, you have a character and you're watching him level up in certain attributes. Don't make the mistake that you are the character. You are the player. You're holding the controls of the character. And the more frequently you remember that, the less likely your emotions and thoughts will overwhelm you. This is so incredibly powerful if you can just dedicate 20 minutes every single day to becoming the watcher, becoming the observer. Watch yourself like a stranger. Now, the third and final exercise I use to better help me manage my mental health is getting into flow states. So flow is a much desired state of existence, even more difficult to describe, but I'm going to give it a go here. So I like to describe flow as a state of being in which time and thoughts cease to exist or cease to become perceptible. Do you remember when you were young having those moments where you would spend all day out playing, football, could be tennis, could be any kind of sport, where you again playing with your friends, and then next thing you know, you look and the sun's going down, the clouds are going orange and red as it's setting, and you're being called home for dinner, and the whole day just went like that. That is flow. That is where thoughts, that is a realm of existence where thoughts do not exist. So the question becomes, how do you then get into flow? What are the ingredients for getting into flow? I have a couple of theories. The first is get into your body. Get into your body and out of your head. Many people are so disconnected from their physical bodies and they exist entirely up here in their head. A quick entry into flow begins by reconnecting with your arms, with your legs, with your heart, with all the very subtle kinetic senses that are going on inside this mechanism, this flesh suit. I find if you can better spend time and attention on things that you're really, really good at and that produce positive emotions, or if you can engage in tasks that have a fairly steep and challenging learning curve, you can get into these states of flow. So the first one, finding something you're good at. I'm really good at lifting weights, so that is how I get into flow and I can lose all sense of time. I'm just starting to learn bouldering, so kind of like rock climbing, and I've had no prior experience with that before. It's really challenging, not just physically but mentally as well, because it's a puzzle in how you better attack that wall, and where to put your hands, where to put your feet. So the trick is finding something that's not too difficult and not too easy, where the ingredients are just right to challenge you, to make it a sufficient challenge. And I'm really, I've spent, I think last Thursday, I spent 2 hours just climbing, and it went like that because there was such a good balance between how difficult it was and it not being too easy that I could just easily climb the wall. So this is the necessary engagement needed to get you into that state of just complete and utter absorption with the task in front of you. So here's what I've really come to understand with getting into flow, is that it negates the thought process. It's very, very difficult to give any mental energy to neurosis in flow. We as human beings just don't have the bandwidth, the attention span necessary to give all our energy to our negative emotions and something challenging or something that we love doing. Needless to say, it's very difficult to think about your depression and your stress if you're benching 3 plates, if you're under the weight of 4 plates in the barbell. It doesn't happen. But then again, gentlemen, these are just my theories. Take what is valuable, discard which is not, and I'll bring you something else very, very soon. Take care, my friends.